Good morning, students. Today's lecture is about globalization in a module, The Locations of Culture. Now, what is globalization? It's a phenomenon that happened during the 1990s that refers to everything from worker migration to global warming, from Microsoft's presence in every PC in third world countries to fundamentalism. It's a process of rapid integration or interconnection between countries. It's a process by which people, their cultures, money, goods, and information can be transferred between countries with few or no barriers. The essential features of globalization as it occurs in 20th century are: first one, the expansion of trade in terms of trading relationships and movement of capital. Due to the expansion of international competition since 1990s, the goods and services have increased their share of the world trade. Major companies have developed their business in other countries seeking unlimited opportunities. There were fewer trade barriers and free flow of goods and services. Economic globalization refers to the increasing interdependence of the world economies as a result of the growing scale of cross-border trade of commodities and services, flow of international capital, and wide and rapid spread of technologies. Imagine an automobile assembled in the US and coming from Japan or the Asian restaurant chains in the Western country. The example of the developing expansion of trade. The second point is the development of transnational and global communication networks. Globalization has accelerated by the use of global communication networks like internet, email, mobile phones, satellite TV, etc. These help multinational corporations to operate throughout the world. This increase in global interactions has caused a growth in the international trade and the exchange of ideas and culture. The development of telecommunication networks results in greater ease and speed of transportation for goods and people. A global village is created when distance and isolation no longer matters because people are connected by technology. Next point is the diminished role of the nation state even within its territorial space. Globalization is generally recognized as a fading or complete disappearance of economic, social, and cultural borders between nation states. Nation states, which are inherently divided by physical and economic boundaries, will be less relevant in a globalized world. Access to international aid and support leads to limited nationalism. Multinational corporations challenge to nation state to confront the foreign direct investment. For example, you can think about your international taxations, GST, VAT, etc. The last feature is the rise of the transnational, cultural, economic, and political networks. Dramatic increase of transnational movement of food, images, people, etc. leads to mixture of cultures or hybridization. Several cultures come together or worldwide infrastructure of airports, malls, computer terminals, chain restaurants erase distinct time and space. There is a creation of a new culture while losing out the local. The pizza effect, for instance, where Americans adapting to the Italian pizza, they have adapted the Italian pizza to the flavors of the local taste. And with time, what happened is that this American pizza became more popular and is even served along with the traditional Italian pizza. And next, we have the increased presence of Western consumer products and cultural artifacts, a kind of McDonaldization of the world. McDonaldization is a word developed by sociologist George Ritzer in his 1993 book, The McDonaldization of Society. For Ritzer, McDonaldization is when a society adopts the characteristics of a fast food restaurant. The process of McDonaldization can be summarized as the way in which the principles of fast food restaurants are coming to dominate more and more sectors of recent idea about the worldwide homogenization of culture due to globalization. McDonaldization brought modernity in India with the help of fast food chains like McDonald's, KFC, Subway, Pizza Hut, etc. Now, let us move on to a few globalization theories, among which we have David Harvey's theory in the beginning. David Harvey, in his book The Condition of Postmodernity, talks about the Enlightenment theory of space and time has disappeared. And he talks about space-time compression, which is a characteristic of postmodernity. Space-time compression, articulated in 1989 by David Harvey in his Condition of Postmodernity, refers to any phenomenon that alters the qualities of and relationship between space and time. It refers to the sense that the world is getting smaller as a result of recent innovations in transportation like rail, cars, trains, jets, etc., economies like the need to overcome spatial barriers, opening up new markets, speeding up production cycles, etc., and communication technology like telegraph, telephones, internet, etc. And then we have Global Transformations by David Held. Globalization, according to David Held, may unite the world physically through mass communication networks, but it does not inculcate a sense of global community and citizenship. It addresses the issue of autonomy of nation states in decision making when dealing with issues of dumping, terrorism, refugees, or financial and market laws. Thus, cultural studies emphasizes on the specificity of local practices within a larger political and cultural framework. Then we shall talk about global culture. When we talk about global culture, we need to emphasize on three categories, that is cultural globalization, products of Western media, and commodification of ethnic products. Cultural globalization refers to the transmission of ideas, meanings, and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. This process is marked by the common consumption of cultures with the help of internet, popular culture media, and international travel. Cultural globalization involves the formation of shared norms and knowledge with which people associate their individual and collective cultural identities. Most self-evident forms of cultural globalization are the products of Western media like television, Western pop, Hollywood icons such as Britney Spears or Arnold Schwarzenegger, and products such as Lee or Coca-Cola. Products of Western media. Much globalized media content comes from the West. Driven by advertising, Western culture and media have a strong consumerist bent, thereby possibly causing foreign cultures to increasingly develop consumerist ideals. Therefore, the globalization of media could not only provide content to a foreign country, but may also create demand for their products. Some believe that this will contribute to a one-way transmission of ideas and values that result in the displacement of indigenous cultures. The outcome of this spread can be homogenization, that is, when the local culture becomes more like the culture of the West, or heterogenization, like when aspects of Western culture come to exist alongside the local culture, causing the culture to become more diverse, or even both depending on specific situation. And commodification of ethnic products. Cultural goods and services are increasingly made to brought and sold on capitalist markets over space and time. In the process, culture becomes a commodity for financial transactions. commodification is often criticized on the grounds that some things ought not to be treated as commodities. For example, things like water, education, data, information, knowledge, human life, and animal life. Now, let's see what Stuart Hall contributed towards globalization theories. Hall argues that there is no global equivalent to local cultures, by which he means corpus of myths, legends, icons, and stories embedded within a national consciousness. Local cultures have strong emotional appeal for people, while global culture have an ethnic appeal without the emotional content. Mike Featherstone suggests that while local culture is closely tied to place and time, global culture is more disconnected and deterritorized. Anita Roderick, who is a founder of the Body Shop, a shop you must all be knowing, had once said in an interview that I wanted to be the Christopher Columbus, going into little villages and see what they have to trade instead of going to those boring old trade fairs. So you can see how she is also into exploring what the local community, local culture has to offer. So this commodification of ethnic products is essential to a global consumer culture. David Held identifies the following as the principal agents of cultural globalization. The pop music, like you would have heard about all the Western pop bands, television, cinema, tourism, global telecommunication, and internet. These are three different responses to cultural globalization. First one is hyperglobalizers. Hyperglobalizers are those who see cultural homogenization as an outcome of the impact of Western media and consumerism. Hyperglobalizers are of the opinion that globalization is real and everywhere. It brings about accelerated economic interdependence and intense competition, which leads to qualitative economic growth. According to them, with increasing globalization, the nation states are drawing to a close. And then we have the skeptics, those who see the impact of global culture as superficial are called the skeptics. The skeptics, as the name suggests, are skeptical about the idea of the global economic integration being anything particularly new. They believe that globalization is exaggerated, and as they look back to the 19th century for flows of trade and investment, which they compare to today's modern society. And again, we have the transformationists. They are the people who predict the emergence of new global cultural networks and hybrids. Their perspective presents what might be viewed as a middle ground between the hyperglobalist and the skeptics. In this perspective, globalization is seen as a long-term historical process that has resulted in significant social, political, and economic changes. And then we have a concept called cultural homogenization. Cultural homogenization is the spread of values, norms, and culture which tends to promote Western ideals of capitalism and consumerism, resulting in disappearance of local cultures, traditions, and identities replaced by a single commodity. Cultural homogenization is a result of westernization of culture. For example, remember how the traditional tea shops and vendors are replaced by hotels and supermarkets. You can even see a small cartoon in the slide where after McDonaldization, what happens is that everyone becomes similar. Then another concept is, and this is now a cartoon, which is also an example for cultural homogenization, where everyone is a representative of different culture of different sectors, and all of them makes the same order. All of them think along, think similar. Now the next concept is interculturalism. And interculturalism is a term that is used by Richard Barucha and Richard Gisner. It refers to the cultural exchanges that are facilitated by globalization. It is the exchange among cultures done by individuals or by non-official groups without obeying national boundaries. The acceptability of Bollywood in West, popularization of Japanese anime are some examples of interculturalism. Ashish Nandy, another theorist, argues to seek a new cosmopolitanism that can fight the cultural hegemony of the West. We need to recover the disowned or subjugated West and make it an ally to fight against hypermodernizing the West. We have to demand for participating cultures equal rights to interpretation and discard the legacy of comparative studies that pits one civilization against another. We need a culture conversation of equals, a conversation of cultures that resists the idea of culturally integrated world. Now we have another important topic, that is glocalization. Glocalization, which is a portmanteau term of globalization and localization. Glocalization is a simultaneous occurrence of both universalizing and particularizing tendencies in contemporary social, political, and economic systems. It is the practice of conducting business according to both local and global considerations. A common example would be the cars that are sold worldwide but adjusted to meet local criteria such as emission standards or what side the steering wheel is located. It also focuses on more cultural aspects such as global fast food chains offering geographically specific menu items that cater to the local taste. Resistance to globalization is also local. In India, Mumbai resistance and Seattle protest marches are clear acts of local resistance. Metropolitan cultural artifacts affect folk and local traditions in India. The spread of mass-mediated music genres has significantly affected the decline and even extension of folk genres in India. Collectively, performed music is replaced by mass media music. The individuals who once performed collectively as a community and the very idea of community even has been changed. There is a decline in community social life rooted in folk drama and music, tea stall culture and festivities. We have now atomized families consuming impersonal media of video, TV, cinema or radio. Globalization can be resisted with recourse to a national imaginary. The global cannot do away with the nation state as a concept. The national facilitates an oppositional discourse to the global. But that does not mean that national is homogeneous. Even national is very much heterogeneous. Rustam Barucha talks about national imaginary, where he thinks about a position where you have the right to criticize the state, which is possible within the constraints of national imaginary, along with the new articulation of cultural representations, like that of women, Dalits, tribal communities, etc. It actively supports an extension of the local and the alternate into the national, seeking to remedy the obvious defect to a national is itself hegemonic. Another concept known as cultural hybridization or creolization is a process where foreign cultural artifacts or systems are assigned fresh values within and by receiving culture. It involves radical redefinition. It involves the development of new cultural forms out of existing ones through a period of contact and interaction, or creating a new culture from the current one. World music, participation in Oscars, exotic holidays are all examples. Cultural hybridization is a mode of dealing with the cultural difference. Next, we have the cyber counterculture. Globalization is closely aligned with the digital transformation and the rise of the information society. This cyber culture of high power business and increase in corporate control over daily lives has generated its own counterculture. A counterculture is a culture whose values and norms of behavior differ substantially from those of the mainstream society, often in opposition to mainstream cultural moves. Preservation of free speech in internet and complete democracy of cyberspace are some of the examples of counterculture in cyberspace. Arjun Appadurai talks about a concept of double apartheid or segregation policies, wherein the first segregation happens when there is separatism of academic debates and vernacular discourses about cultural autonomy and economic survival. And the second one happens when the poor and the educates find themselves far from the anxieties of discourses of globalization. So now we have come to the end of the topic. Now just revise the concepts of globalization, where we have a rapid integration or interconnection between the countries, global culture, which constitutes culturalization, products of Western media, commodification of ethnic products, and cultural homogenization, where again we talk about the spread of Western values, norms, and culture. We have interculturalism, which is the exchange among cultures. We have cultural hybridity, where we create a new culture from the existing one. And we have cyber counterculture, where the Appadurai talks about double apartheid. That's all for the class. Thank you so much for watching.